The new girl in class. The bell rang, echoing through the hallways of Westfield High like a signal that summoned a battalion to battle. Students shuffled into their classrooms, some eager to dive into the day's lessons, while others trudged in with a familiar sense of dread. In Miss Roberts' English class, the air was thick with an unsettling tension, a palpable discomfort that often accompanied her lessons. This day, however, promised an unexpected twist. As the final students trickled into the room, Jasmine King stepped through the doorway, her heart racing. The weight of her new backpack pressed against her shoulder, a reminder of the fresh start she was hoping to carve out in this unfamiliar territory. She was no stranger to the whispers and glances that followed her as she moved toward an empty desk. Some of the students eyed her with curiosity, while others exchanged wary looks, unsure of how the new girl would fit into their tightly knit class. At the front of the room, Miss Roberts stood poised like a hawk, her sharp gaze sweeping over the students as they settled into their seats. The moment her eyes landed on Jasmine, a frown creased her forehead. Jasmine felt the scrutiny, an unwelcome spotlight that magnified her insecurities. She met the teacher's gaze with quiet determination, refusing to let the unease consume her. Well, Miss Roberts began, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that felt anything but genuine. It seems we have a new addition to our class. I do hope you can keep up with our rigorous curriculum. The way she emphasized rigorous sent a ripple of unease through the room. It was clear she had her doubts about Jasmine, the new girl who didn't quite fit the mold of her expectations. Jasmine squared her shoulders, determined to prove Miss Roberts wrong. She could feel the tension in the air, but she wouldn't let it deter her. As the teacher turned her back to the class, writing the day's lesson on the whiteboard, Jasmine took a deep breath. Today was not just about fitting in. It was about standing her ground. Today we'll be discussing the themes of power and oppression in To Kill a Mockingbird, Miss Roberts announced, her tone slicing through the silence. The title of the book sent a wave of anticipation through the class, and Jasmine's heart quickened. She had always found strength in literature, a way to escape the harsh realities of the world around her. Who would like to start? Miss Roberts asked, her gaze sweeping across the classroom like a predator searching for its prey. Hands shot up, eager to engage, but Jasmine's hand rose higher, driven by a sense of urgency. She had something to say, something important. Miss King, Miss Roberts said, finally acknowledging her raised hand. The others quieted down, curiosity piqued. Jasmine's voice was steady as she began to speak. I believe the novel shows how systemic racism. Systemic racism? Miss Roberts interrupted, her tone dripping with condescension. My dear, I think you're confusing this classic American novel with some modern political agenda. A ripple of unease passed through the classroom. Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some casting nervous glances at Jasmine. Others seemed to relish the confrontation, leaning back with smug expressions. Jasmine felt her cheeks flush, but she held her ground. With all due respect, Miss Roberts, she replied, her voice unwavering. The racial injustice in the book is a reflection of our society. It's not just a modern agenda. It's a reality that many people face every day. Miss Roberts' smile faded, replaced by a look of irritation. That's quite enough, Miss King, she snapped, waving her hand dismissively. Perhaps you should focus on understanding the text as it's written rather than trying to impose your own interpretations. The air grew thick with tension, and Jasmine's jaw clenched. She wanted to respond, to stand up for herself, but she knew that engaging further would only escalate the situation. Instead, she sat silently, her fingers curling around the edge of her desk, channeling her frustration into a quiet defiance. As the class continued, Miss Roberts pointedly ignored Jasmine's attempts to participate. Each time Jasmine raised her hand, the teacher would deliberately look past her, as if she were invisible. The message was clear. Jasmine's voice was not welcome in this classroom. Despite the teacher's blatant disregard, Jasmine remained composed. Her pen moved steadily across her notebook, taking meticulous notes as a small act of resistance. She would not allow Miss Roberts to silence her. She was determined to make her mark, even if it meant standing alone against the tide. The lesson progressed, and Miss Roberts' disdain grew more pronounced. "Now let's discuss the actual themes the author intended," she continued, calling on students one by one. Each time, Jasmine's heart sank a little more, her frustration building. It was as if the teacher took pleasure in belittling her, reveling in the power she held over her students. As the class neared its end, Miss Roberts announced a group project, her eyes glinting with a cruel anticipation. "I'll be assigning the groups. We wouldn't want anyone to feel out of place." The implications of her words hung heavy in the air, and Jasmine's stomach twisted. She recognized the challenge for what it was, a deliberate attempt to isolate her further. With a fierce determination, Jasmine squared her shoulders and met Miss Roberts' gaze with quiet resolve. As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, students began to file out. Jasmine took her time gathering her things, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Just as she reached the door, Miss Roberts called out, her tone laced with condescension. "Miss King, a word." Jasmine turned, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, Miss Roberts." The teacher's smile was thin and sharp, revealing her true intentions. "I hope you understand that in this class, we focus on facts and analysis, not personal opinions or agendas. I'd hate to see you struggle because you can't separate your feelings from the curriculum." For a moment, Jasmine said nothing, allowing the words to hang in the air. With calm that belied the storm brewing inside her, she replied, "I understand perfectly, Miss Roberts. I look forward to demonstrating my analysis skills in our next discussion." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Miss Roberts staring after her. A flicker of uncertainty crossed the teacher's face, but Jasmine didn't see it. She was too busy thinking about the challenge ahead, knowing that the next class would reveal the depths of Miss Roberts' prejudice and test her strength like never before. Unmasking prejudice. As the second week of school began, the tension in Miss Roberts' classroom reached a boiling point. Jasmine King walked through the door with renewed determination, her head held high despite the emotional toll the previous week had taken on her. The air crackled with an electric charge as students settled into their seats, each person aware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Today was not just another day. It was a test, a challenge that she was ready to face head-on. Miss Roberts stood at the front of the class, her posture rigid and authoritative. The moment her gaze met Jasmine's, a flicker of irritation crossed her face. Jasmine felt it deep in her gut, a primal instinct that told her this teacher would not let her have a moment of peace. She took her seat, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. This time, she wouldn't let Miss Roberts' hostility derail her spirit. The lesson began, and Miss Roberts wasted no time in setting the tone. "Today, we will delve into the complexities of character development in To Kill a Mockingbird," she announced, her voice sharp and condescending. "I trust you've all read the chapters. Let's see who can analyze them best." Hands shot up around the room, and Miss Roberts called on students, quickly brushing aside Jasmine's eager hand. This time, Jasmine felt a deeper surge of frustration welling within her. It wasn't just the exclusion. It was the realization that Miss Roberts was deliberately trying to diminish her presence, her voice, her very essence. "Miss Thompson, what do you think of Atticus Finch's moral compass?" Miss Roberts asked, turning her back on Jasmine yet again. I think he represents integrity and justice," answered Miss Thompson, her voice dripping with confidence. The class nodded in agreement, as if they were all part of some exclusive club that Jasmine was not invited to join. "Excellent," Miss Roberts exclaimed, her eyes glimmering with approval. "You see, class, Atticus embodies the values we should all strive for." The teacher's praise seemed to reinforce a wall between Jasmine and her classmates. She bit her lip, feeling the weight of isolation pressing down on her. With each student who spoke, Jasmine felt the gulf between her and her peers widen. When Miss Roberts finally turned to her, It was with a pointed glare. "Miss King, would you like to add your thoughts?" The implication was clear. This was a challenge, a moment where her words could either break the tension or exacerbate it. Taking a deep breath, Jasmine found her voice. "I think Atticus represents the struggle against societal injustice," she began, her heart racing as she spoke. "His character challenges the prejudiced views of Macomb, showing that true courage means standing up for what's right, even when it's unpopular." For a brief moment, the classroom fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Miss Roberts' expression hardened, and the slight curve of her lips turned into a scowl. "You seem to be quite enamored with this struggle against societal injustice, Miss King. But remember, we're discussing character analysis here, not your personal beliefs." A wave of whispers rippled through the class, and Jasmine felt a rush of heat flood her cheeks. The other students exchanged uneasy glances, some visibly uncomfortable with the confrontation. Jasmine stood her ground, fighting back tears of frustration. "But isn't that what the book is about?" she countered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Atticus is a character who embodies the fight against injustice, and his moral decisions reflect that struggle." "Enough," Miss Roberts snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "We don't need to hear your interpretations based on your personal agenda. Focus on the text." With that, the discussion turned back to the other students, leaving Jasmine feeling small and invisible once again. Each word from Miss Roberts felt like a blow, but Jasmine refused to let it shatter her spirit. She shifted in her seat, determined to remain engaged despite the weight of exclusion hanging heavily over her. As the class dragged on, Miss Roberts' behavior grew increasingly brazen. She nitpicked Jasmine's participation with an intensity that bordered on obsession. "Miss King, why are you writing in your notebook when you should be listening? This is not a time for doodling," she chastised, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized Jasmine's every move. But Jasmine wasn't doodling. She was writing down her thoughts, capturing her reflections on the discussion in a way that felt meaningful to her. It was her way of processing the pain and frustration she felt, a small act of rebellion against the tide of negativity that threatened to pull her under. The class finally drew to a close, and as the bell rang, students began to gather their things. Jasmine remained seated, staring at her notes as the classroom emptied around her. She felt a strange mix of determination and exhaustion wash over her. Today hadn't gone as planned, but she was far from defeated. "Miss King," Miss Roberts called out as the last student left the room, her tone icy and sharp. Jasmine turned to face her, steeling herself for whatever verbal barrage was to come. "I hope you understand that in my class, we focus on facts and analysis, not personal opinions or political agendas. You're lucky I haven't reported your behavior yet." Jasmine took a deep breath, refusing to let Miss Roberts' words intimidate her. "I understand perfectly, Miss Roberts," she replied evenly. "But I will not apologize for my beliefs or for wanting to contribute to the discussion." The teacher's eyes widened in surprise at Jasmine's boldness. For a moment, they stood locked in a silent battle of wills, both refusing to back down. Miss Roberts' expression shifted, revealing a flicker of uncertainty as Jasmine turned on her heel and walked out of the classroom. As Jasmine made her way down the hallway, she felt the weight of the world lift slightly off her shoulders. She was standing up for herself, and that was no small feat. However, she knew this battle was far from over. Miss Roberts would not back down easily, and the tensions in the classroom were only bound to escalate. That evening, Jasmine sat at her desk, a swirl of emotions flooding her mind. She needed to channel this frustration into something constructive. She pulled out her journal, a safe haven where her thoughts could roam free. As she wrote about the day's events, each stroke of her pen felt like a cathartic release, allowing her to process the hurt and anger she experienced. "Today was a battle," she wrote, "but I refuse to let Miss Roberts define my worth or my voice. If I have to stand alone, then so be it. I will not be silenced." With each word, she felt a growing sense of empowerment. Jasmine knew that she was not just fighting for herself, but for anyone who had ever felt marginalized or voiceless. She was determined to rise above the prejudice that threatened to envelop her, to shine a light on the injustices that lurked behind the walls of Westfield High. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across her room, Jasmine made a silent vow to herself. She would continue to speak her truth, no matter the cost. She would not only confront Miss Roberts, but also challenge the deeply rooted prejudices that had plagued the school for far too long. This was only the beginning of her journey, and she was ready to face whatever came next. A ripple in the system. The following day, as the sun peeked through her bedroom window, Jasmine woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The weight of the previous week's confrontations still lingered, but instead of succumbing to doubt, she felt a fire igniting within her. Today was a new opportunity. A chance to turn the tide in her classroom and perhaps in the broader school environment. She donned her favorite outfit, a bright yellow blouse that symbolized her optimism and determination. As she looked in the mirror, she told herself that she wouldn't allow anyone, especially Miss Roberts, to dim her light. Jasmine gathered her belongings, including her journal, which she had started carrying to school as a place to jot down her thoughts and reflections throughout the day. When she arrived at Westfield High, the hallways buzzed with the sounds of laughter and chatter. Jasmine navigated through the crowd, exchanging quick smiles with a few classmates who had begun to warm up to her, despite the tension in Miss Roberts' class. It felt good to know that she was not entirely alone, even if the battle ahead was daunting. As she entered Miss Roberts' classroom, the atmosphere was charged, the air thick with a sense of expectation. The students were settling into their seats, exchanging glances filled with curiosity. Jasmine felt a familiar knot of anxiety twist in her stomach, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the mission ahead. "Good morning, class," Miss Roberts announced, her voice dripping with insincerity. "Today we will be discussing the consequences of prejudice in To Kill a Mockingbird." The irony of her choice of topic was not lost on Jasmine, and she could feel her heart race. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Miss Roberts continued, "Let's explore how prejudice affects not only the individuals who are targeted, but also the society as a whole. Who can give an example?" Jasmine raised her hand, the urgency of her thoughts pushing her forward. "Miss Roberts, I believe that the prejudice faced by Tom Robinson in the novel is a perfect example. It demonstrates how deeply ingrained biases can lead to tragic outcomes, not just for the individuals involved, but for the entire community," she said, her voice steady. For a split second, a flicker of annoyance crossed Miss Roberts' face, but she quickly masked it. "That's a valid point, Miss King. But let's remember to stay focused on the text itself, not just the social implications," she replied, her tone dismissive. Jasmine felt her frustration bubbling to the surface. "But isn't that the core of the story?" she pressed, unable to hold back. "The entire narrative revolves around the fight against systemic racism and the consequences of prejudice. It's not just a literary analysis, it's a reflection of our reality." The room fell silent, the tension rising as students exchanged unsure glances. Miss Roberts' face darkened. "Miss King, we have a structured curriculum for a reason. Your personal interpretations are irrelevant to our discussion today." "Isn't that exactly the problem, Miss Roberts?" Jasmine shot back, her voice gaining strength. "If we ignore the implications of what we're reading, how can we ever hope to learn from it? Education should challenge us to confront uncomfortable truths." At that moment, Jasmine felt a shift in the classroom dynamic. Several students shifted in their seats, leaning forward as if drawn to the intensity of the exchange. Miss Roberts, clearly taken aback by Jasmine's boldness, struggled to regain control. "Enough," she barked, her voice echoing off the walls. "We will proceed with the lesson as planned. I will not have this class devolve into a political debate." She turned her back on Jasmine, attempting to move on to the next student, but the damage had been done. Jasmine's heart raced as she sat in silence, her mind whirling. She had struck a nerve, but she also understood the risks of challenging authority. Yet this time felt different. The students around her were watching, absorbing the tension and the palpable resistance in the room. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could spark a change. As the class continued, Jasmine took notes, her mind racing with ideas for how to approach the project they were working on. She knew she needed to find a way to unite her group and address the prejudice that was manifesting in their very own classroom. During lunch, she gathered her courage and approached Kyle and Amy at their usual table. "Hey, can I join you?" Jasmine asked, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Of course," Kyle replied, his face lighting up with a welcoming smile. Amy nodded enthusiastically, a reassuring gesture that eased Jasmine's nerves. "I was thinking about our project," Jasmine began, glancing around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "What if we included a section that highlights the broader implications of prejudice, not just within the book, but in our school and community?" "Like how?" Amy asked, her eyes sparkling with interest. "Well, we could conduct a small survey among our classmates about their experiences with bias or exclusion. It would give our presentation a personal touch and make it more relevant," Jasmine suggested, her excitement growing. Kyle leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "That's a great idea. It would definitely add depth to our project." As they discussed the logistics, Jasmine felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time since entering Westfield High, she felt like she was part of something bigger, a movement towards change. The idea of conducting a survey made her feel empowered, and she could sense her teammates sharing in her enthusiasm. The next day, they distributed the survey during lunch, asking students about their experiences with prejudice and how it had impacted their lives. The responses poured in, each one a testament to the pervasive nature of bias that had seeped into the school's culture. Jasmine and her team collected the data and began to analyze it. The results were both enlightening and disheartening. Students from various backgrounds shared stories of feeling excluded, bullied, or judged based on their race, appearance, or socioeconomic status. As they compiled the information into a cohesive presentation, Jasmine felt a sense of urgency. This project had the potential to shine a light on issues that had been swept under the rug for far too long. She knew it wouldn't be easy to confront Miss Roberts and the class with these truths, but she also understood that silence would only perpetuate the cycle of prejudice. The day of their presentation arrived, and Jasmine could feel the nervous energy crackling in the air. The classroom was filled with students, some whispering, others scrolling through their phones, and a few exchanging glances that suggested they were aware of the storm brewing within the classroom. "Today, we'll be presenting our project on the themes of prejudice in To Kill a Mockingbird and its relevance to our school community," Jasmine announced as she stood at the front, flanked by Kyle and Amy. She could see Miss Roberts sitting at her desk, her expression inscrutable. As they progressed through the slides, Jasmine took the lead, presenting the data they had collected. "We reached out to our classmates to better understand how prejudice manifests in our school environment," she began, her voice steady and confident. The responses revealed that many students feel marginalized and unsupported because of their backgrounds. The room fell silent, the gravity of her words sinking in. Miss Roberts shifted in her seat, her expression hardening as she realized the direction of the presentation. "Here are some of the experiences shared by students," Jasmine continued, clicking through the slides to reveal quotes and anecdotes that illustrated the impact of bias. "These stories show us that prejudice doesn't just exist in novels. It's a very real part of our daily lives." As Jasmine read through the testimonies, she could see some students nodding in agreement, their expressions shifting from apathy to concern. This was the moment she had hoped for, a moment of connection, a moment of truth. However, Miss Roberts' voice broke through the tension like thunder. "Miss King, this is completely inappropriate," she exclaimed, her face flushed with anger. "This is not the platform to air personal grievances. You're misusing this project to promote your own agenda." Jasmine took a deep breath, meeting Miss Roberts' fierce gaze with unwavering determination. With all due respect, Miss Roberts, this is precisely the point. If we're going to learn from To Kill a Mockingbird, we need to confront these issues head-on. Ignoring them won't make them disappear. The class was silent, tension hanging thick in the air. Some students whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Jasmine and Miss Roberts. The stakes had never felt higher. "Jasmine, you need to understand that," Miss Roberts began, but Jasmine cut her off, emboldened by the support of her classmates. "Actually, what we need to understand is that silence perpetuates prejudice. We can't learn from history if we're unwilling to acknowledge the lessons it teaches us," she declared, her voice ringing clear and true. The classroom buzzed with murmurs as students exchanged glances, a ripple of awareness spreading among them. Jasmine could feel the tide beginning to turn, a sense of solidarity emerging in the air. "Let's not forget that literature has the power to inspire change," Annie added, her voice steady. "If we don't allow ourselves to engage in these conversations, we're failing both ourselves and the authors who wrote these important stories." Kyle chimed in, "We're not here to attack anyone. We just want to create a dialogue. We all have a responsibility to challenge prejudice and to support each other, no matter our backgrounds." Jasmine's heart raced as she realized that they were all on the same side. This wasn't just her battle anymore. It was theirs too. She could see the expressions on her classmates' faces shifting from skepticism to understanding, and it filled her with hope. Miss Roberts, her authority challenged, looked visibly shaken. For the first time, she hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She started, but the words caught in her throat. "We're not asking for permission," Jasmine said, her voice filled with conviction. "We're asking for change. We're asking for the chance to learn and grow from these experiences." With that, Jasmine felt a wave of adrenaline wash over her. She knew they had taken a significant step forward, but the battle was far from over. As the presentation concluded, the room erupted into a mix of applause and murmurs, a collective acknowledgement of the importance of their message. As the students began to file out of the classroom, Jasmine felt a rush of exhilaration. She had faced down Miss Roberts, challenged the status quo, and ignited a conversation that had been long overdue. In that moment, she realized the power of her voice, the ripple it could create in the lives of others. "Thank you for being so brave, Jasmine," Kyle said as they gathered their things. "I don't think I could have done that." "Yeah, me neither," Annie agreed, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "You really inspired all of us." Jasmine smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "We did this together. This is just the beginning," she replied, feeling a sense of camaraderie with her teammates. They had forged a bond through this struggle, and together they could continue to challenge the biases that lingered within their school. As they walked out into the hallway, Jasmine felt the weight of the world lift slightly off her shoulders. She had taken a stand, and in doing so, she had shown not only herself, but also her classmates that change was possible. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but Jasmine was ready to face them head-on, knowing that her voice, and the voices of those around her, had the power to inspire transformation. The backlash. The exhilaration from the presentation still buzzed in the air as Jasmine stepped out of Miss Roberts' classroom, but that energy was quickly overshadowed by the weight of what was to come. As she walked down the bustling hallways of Westfield High, she could hear snippets of conversations buzzing around her, some students whispering excitedly, while others shot her furtive glances filled with uncertainty. Despite the support she had felt in the classroom, there was an undercurrent of tension that Jasmine couldn't ignore. The moment she entered the cafeteria, the energy shifted. It was a place of refuge for many students, but now it felt like a battleground, a landscape where alliances were tested and rumors ran rampant. "Did you hear what happened in Miss Roberts' class?" a voice called out from a nearby table. Jasmine's heart sank as she caught fragments of conversations about her presentation, dissected and analyzed like a specimen under a microscope. "Yeah, I can't believe she challenged Miss Roberts like that." She totally overstepped, another voice chimed in, filled with a mix of disbelief and disdain. Jasmine's stomach twisted into knots. She hadn't expected universal support, but the backlash was sharper than she anticipated. She took a deep breath, determined not to let the negativity dampen her spirit. She had to keep moving forward. As she joined Kyle and Amy at their usual table, the atmosphere around them felt heavy. They exchanged concerned glances, sensing the change in Jasmine's demeanor. "Hey, are you okay?" Kyle asked, his brow furrowing with concern. "I'm fine," Jasmine replied, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "It's just, I didn't think people would react like this." "Don't let it get to you," Amy said, her voice soothing. "What you did was brave. You stood up for what's right, and that matters more than what they say." Jasmine nodded, grateful for their support, but the gnawing anxiety wouldn't leave her. She knew the road ahead was going to be fraught with obstacles, but she hadn't anticipated the fallout would be so immediate. The next day, whispers followed her through the hallways. Jasmine could feel the judgment in the stares of some students, while others were emboldened to approach her, offering reluctant praise or uncomfortable inquiries. "Are you really trying to change things?" one girl asked, her tone a mix of skepticism and intrigue. "Yes, I am," Jasmine replied firmly, surprising herself with her own conviction. "We need to talk about these issues. They're important." Yet each encounter chipped away at her confidence. She found herself increasingly isolated, the support she had felt during the presentation feeling distant. Miss Roberts' disdain for her only added fuel to the fire. "Miss King," she said one day, her voice dripping with condescension, "I hope you realize that the presentation you gave was not only inappropriate, but also a disservice to your classmates. We are here to learn, not to engage in political debates." Jasmine felt her heart race, but she stood her ground. "With all due respect, Miss Roberts, we learned a lot from discussing real issues. Ignoring them won't make them go away," she replied, her voice steady despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. "That attitude will get you nowhere, young lady," Miss Roberts snapped back. "You may think you're a champion of change, but you are simply creating more division." The confrontation left Jasmine reeling. Doubts began to creep into her mind. Was she really making a difference, or was she just stirring the pot? As the days passed, she felt the isolation weighing heavily on her shoulders. The support from Kyle and Amy remained steadfast, but Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that they were the only ones in her corner. At home, Jasmine poured her feelings into her journal, using it as a sanctuary to process the turmoil swirling within her. She wrote about the tension in the air, the whispers that had become a constant companion, and the sense of being an outcast in a place where she had hoped to find acceptance. "I am more than just a target for ridicule," she wrote fiercely. "I am a student with a voice, and I refuse to be silenced." But her words felt like a temporary balm rather than a solution. The following week, she noticed a shift among her classmates. The initial shock of her presentation had faded, replaced by an unspoken tension that hung in the air. Some students began to openly criticize her, fueling a rumor mill that churned out speculation about her intentions. "Who does she think she is?" Jasmine overheard one student say, "acting like she's the moral compass of the school." Jasmine tried to ignore the comments, but they cut deeper than she expected. The same girl from the cafeteria confronted her again, this time with a more aggressive stance. "You really think you can change things around here? You're just making it worse for yourself." "Maybe you're right," Jasmine replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But someone has to start the conversation." The girl rolled her eyes and walked away, leaving Jasmine feeling even more isolated. It seemed like the more she tried to make a difference, the more she was pushed away. One afternoon, as Jasmine sat in the library working on her homework, she spotted Chad Peterson approaching her table. The sight of him sent a wave of anxiety through her. She could almost hear the laughter of her classmates echoing in her ears, their doubts ringing louder than ever. "What do you want, Chad?" she asked, trying to mask her apprehension. "I just wanted to say," he said, his tone surprisingly calm, "that I didn't mean to come off as a jerk during the presentation. I just didn't see the point in all the drama." Jasmine blinked, caught off guard by his unexpected admission. "You really think that what I did was drama?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Not drama, per se," he replied, leaning against the table, "but maybe a little over the top. Not everyone cares about your little crusade, you know." "That's not the point," Jasmine snapped, frustration boiling over. "It's about making sure everyone feels included, not just those who fit a certain mold. It's about challenging prejudice." Chad's expression shifted, a flicker of something, perhaps understanding, crossing his features. "Okay, I get that," he conceded. "But maybe you should think about how you come across. Not everyone is going to be on board with you just because you say so. Maybe if more people spoke up about these issues, they'd understand." Jasmine retorted, her voice rising. She could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, fueled by her desire to be heard. Chad held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Look, I'm not trying to fight you. I'm just saying that sometimes it's better to pick your battles." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Jasmine feeling a mix of anger and confusion. As the days turned into weeks, the hostility toward her only seemed to grow. Jasmine felt like she was walking on eggshells, constantly aware of the judgment that lurked in the hallways. Even some of her friends began to distance themselves, unsure of how to navigate the shifting dynamics that Jasmine's presentation had created. Despite the negativity, Jasmine clung to the support of Kyle and Amy. They met in the library after school to work on their project and discuss strategies to address the ongoing backlash. "We can't let this stop us," Amy said firmly, her brown eyes filled with determination. "What we did was important. We can't lose sight of that." "Yeah, we need to keep pushing for change," Kyle added, leaning forward. "Maybe we can organize a discussion panel or a workshop on bias and inclusivity, something that engages the entire school." Jasmine's heart lifted at the thought. "That's a great idea," she exclaimed, feeling a rush of excitement. "We could invite teachers, students. Everyone could have a chance to voice their experiences." Over the next few days, the trio poured their energy into organizing the event. They collaborated with student council members to secure a venue and sent out invitations to faculty and students alike, hoping to create a safe space for discussion. But even as they worked tirelessly to promote the event, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. She had seen how Miss Roberts reacted to her presentation, and she knew there would be pushback. Still, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, their efforts would help bridge the divide that had formed in the school. Finally, the day of the event arrived, and the atmosphere in the auditorium was electric. Students filtered in, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Jasmine stood at the front, her heart pounding as she took in the sight of her peers, gathering to discuss something so vital and so often overlooked. "Thank you all for coming," Jasmine began, her voice trembling slightly but growing steadier with each word. "Today, we're here to talk about bias and inclusivity, issues that affect each and every one of us. It's important that we create a community where everyone feels heard and valued." As she spoke, she could see students nodding along, some whispering to each other in anticipation. The panel featured several teachers, including Miss Roberts, who reluctantly agreed to participate, likely to reinforce her views. As the discussions began, Jasmine felt a mixture of excitement and dread. The conversations flowed, stories were shared, and the room began to fill with an energy that felt transformative. But as the discussion progressed, Miss Roberts interjected, her voice cold and dismissive. "This is all well and good, but we must remember to keep things in perspective. Not every disagreement or issue stems from prejudice. We should not exaggerate our experiences to fit a narrative." Jasmine felt her heart drop. "But that's the problem," she countered, her voice gaining strength. "Ignoring the nuances of bias only perpetuates the cycle. Everyone has different experiences, and it's vital we acknowledge those. The tension in the room escalated, and Jasmine could feel the weight of Miss Roberts' gaze piercing through her. It was clear she would not back down easily, and Jasmine braced herself for the battle ahead. "Let's not turn this into a debate," Miss Roberts said, attempting to regain control of the room. "We're here to learn from each other, not to point fingers or assign blame. But if we can't talk openly about these issues, how will we ever learn?" Jasmine replied, her heart racing as she met Miss Roberts' gaze head-on. The back and forth continued, and Jasmine felt a surge of empowerment. This was her moment, not just for herself, but for everyone who felt marginalized or unheard. As the panel concluded, Jasmine felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her. They had created a space for dialogue, for understanding, and that was a victory in itself. The road ahead would still be challenging, but she was no longer alone. She had allies in her fight, and together, they would continue to advocate for change in their school. In the weeks that followed, the conversation sparked by the panel continued, fostering a sense of community among students. Slowly, the climate at Westfield High began to shift, with more students engaging in discussions about bias and inclusivity, challenging the narratives that had dominated their school culture for far too long. Jasmine knew there would still be setbacks and challenges, but she was ready to face them head-on. With Kyle and Amy by her side, she felt a sense of hope for a brighter, more inclusive future, a future where every voice would be heard, and every story mattered. Seeds of change. In the weeks following the discussion panel, the atmosphere at Westfield High began to shift slowly but surely. Students who once felt isolated began to find their voices, emboldened by the conversations Jasmine and her friends had sparked. Jasmine felt a flicker of hope each time she walked through the hallways and saw students engaged in discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, not everyone was on board with the changes. While some embraced the movement, others clung stubbornly to their biases, unwilling to accept that the world around them was changing. Jasmine knew that the journey ahead was not going to be easy. She was aware that real change often came with resistance. One afternoon, as Jasmine sat in the library working on her assignments with Kyle and Amy, a familiar face approached their table. It was Chad, and the tension in the air thickened instantly. Jasmine felt her heart race, unsure of what to expect. "Hey, can I talk to you guys for a second?" Chad asked, his voice surprisingly serious. Jasmine exchanged glances with Kyle and Amy, who both nodded in silent encouragement. "Sure," she replied cautiously. Chad pulled up a chair, his expression earnest. "I wanted to apologize for how I acted during the panel. I didn't realize how important this stuff was to you. I've been thinking about what you said, and I guess I want to understand more." Jasmine felt a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "Really? You want to understand?" she asked, trying to gauge his sincerity. "Yeah," Chad said, running a hand through his hair. "I've been a jerk, and I know it. I just didn't see it before. But I've heard some things since the panel, and it made me realize that maybe I need to change how I think." Kyle leaned in, clearly intrigued. "That's a big step, Chad. A lot of people don't want to admit they need to change." "I know, but I want to try," Chad replied earnestly. "I mean, I have a lot of privilege, and I never thought about how that affects other people. So, I'm here to listen if you want to share more." Jasmine studied Chad for a moment, weighing her response. She could sense the sincerity in his voice, but old habits die hard. "Okay," she said cautiously. "What do you want to know?" As they began to talk, Jasmine felt a sense of hope creeping in. This was the kind of dialogue she had envisioned, a genuine conversation aimed at understanding and growth. As she shared her experiences and the impact of prejudice on her life, Chad listened intently, nodding as she spoke. "I had no idea how many people felt excluded or marginalized," he said, his voice low. "I've seen the school from a different angle, I guess, and it's made me rethink a lot of things. I want to help create change too." Jasmine smiled, feeling a flicker of warmth. It's not going to be easy, but every little step counts. We need more people willing to stand up and speak out. As they wrapped up their conversation, Chad mentioned that he wanted to help with the next steps of their project. What if we organized another event, maybe something more interactive? I could help spread the word, get more people involved, he suggested. Really? You'd do that? Jasmine asked, surprised. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's time to use my privilege to uplift others, Chad replied confidently. Let's make it happen. Over the next few weeks, the momentum continued to build. Jasmine, Kyle, Amy, and Chad collaborated to create a series of workshops aimed at fostering open dialogue about bias and inclusivity. They enlisted the help of teachers and student leaders to ensure a wide range of voices would be heard. As they worked tirelessly to prepare for the upcoming workshops, Jasmine found herself in a whirlwind of activity. She felt invigorated, buoyed by the support of her friends and the new allies she was making. They reached out to students across various grades, encouraging them to share their stories and participate in the workshops. The day of the first workshop arrived, and excitement buzzed through the hallways. Students trickled into the auditorium, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Jasmine stood at the front, her heart racing, as she prepared to welcome them. "Thank you all for coming today," she said, her voice steady. "We're here to talk about bias and inclusivity, to share our experiences and learn from each other. This is a safe space where everyone is encouraged to speak their truth." As the workshop progressed, Jasmine facilitated discussions that challenged the students to confront their own biases and listen to the experiences of others. The atmosphere in the room shifted from apprehension to engagement as students began to share their stories. Stories of exclusion, misunderstanding, and growth. "Last year, I was bullied for wearing different clothes," one student shared. "It made me feel like I didn't belong, like I was an outsider. But now, I realize that my uniqueness is what makes me special." As stories flowed, Jasmine felt a sense of validation wash over her. This was what she had envisioned. A space where students could connect, empathize, and challenge their preconceived notions. However, not everyone was on board with the message. A group of students at the back of the auditorium scoffed at the discussions, rolling their eyes and whispering among themselves. Jasmine noticed them exchanging glances filled with disdain, but she refused to let their negativity dampen her spirits. Halfway through the workshop, Chad stepped up to share his own story. "I used to think I understood everything because of my background," he admitted. "But this past month has opened my eyes. I realized that I need to listen more and speak less. I'm sorry for my previous behavior, and I'm committed to being part of the solution moving forward." His vulnerability resonated with many students, and the atmosphere in the room softened. Even the students at the back seemed to lean in slightly, curiosity flickering in their eyes. As the workshop continued, Jasmine and her friends facilitated small group discussions, allowing students to delve deeper into their experiences. She could see the hesitance begin to melt away as they engaged in meaningful conversations. By the end of the session, Jasmine felt a surge of accomplishment. Students were talking to one another, sharing stories, and finding common ground. The discussions that had once felt taboo were now flowing freely, a testament to the power of open dialogue. As the workshop wrapped up, Jasmine stood at the front, her heart full. "Thank you all for being brave today. This is just the beginning. Let's continue to challenge each other and grow together," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. As the students filed out, Jasmine felt a wave of relief wash over her. They had taken a step toward change, but she knew it was only the beginning. The road ahead would still be rocky, filled with resistance and challenges, but she was ready to face them. In the following weeks, they held additional workshops, and the ripple effect of their efforts began to permeate the school. Conversation shifted. More students began to share their experiences, and even some of the teachers started to join in, acknowledging their own biases and the need for growth. However, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that not everyone was on board. Miss Roberts remained a significant obstacle, her demeanor cold and dismissive. She often interrupted workshops with critical comments, trying to steer conversations back to a more traditional narrative. Jasmine knew she would have to confront her directly soon, but she felt a newfound strength from the support of her peers. One day, after another successful workshop, Jasmine and her friends were cleaning up when Miss Roberts approached them, arms crossed tightly. "I've heard about your little workshops," she began, her voice laced with disapproval. "I hope you understand that this is not the proper way to address these issues. You're creating division, not fostering understanding." Jasmine took a deep breath, determined to stand her ground. "We're not creating division. We're opening a dialogue. People are finally talking about things that have been ignored for far too long," she replied, her heart racing, but her voice steady. Miss Roberts' lips tightened into a thin line. "You're playing with fire, Jasmine. You may think you're a leader, but you're treading on dangerous ground. Perhaps it's time for some change in how we approach these issues," Jasmine said boldly, her determination solidifying. "If we don't talk about our biases, how will we ever learn?" The confrontation hung heavy in the air, a palpable tension that sent a shiver down Jasmine's spine. Yet she stood firm, ready to defend the space they had created. Miss Roberts opened her mouth to respond, but Jasmine cut her off, knowing this was her moment. "I won't back down, and I won't let fear silence me. We're here to make a difference, and that's exactly what we're going to do." With that, Jasmine turned and walked away, a surge of empowerment flooding through her. She had faced her fears, challenged authority, and made her voice heard. The seeds of change had been planted, and she was determined to help them grow. As the weeks turned into months, Jasmine continued to champion for inclusivity and understanding within Westfield High. The workshops evolved into a movement, encouraging students to stand up, share their experiences, and challenge their biases. Jasmine knew that real change would take time, but as she looked around at her friends and peers, she felt a sense of hope for the future. Together, they would continue to push for a culture of acceptance, understanding, and unity, ensuring that every voice mattered in the ongoing journey toward change. A new beginning. As the school year neared its end, the atmosphere at Westfield High was charged with a palpable sense of change. The workshops Jasmine, Kyle, Amy, and Chad had initiated had blossomed into a movement, fostering open conversations about diversity and inclusion. Students were no longer merely passive observers. They were becoming active participants in shaping the culture of their school. However, the final weeks of the school year were not without challenges. Miss Roberts remained a formidable presence, often dismissing the students' efforts during class discussions and reminding them that the curriculum should remain strictly academic. Despite this, Jasmine and her friends found ways to work around her, creating a vibrant community that transcended the classroom walls. One bright Wednesday afternoon, Jasmine sat in the library with Kyle and Amy, discussing their plans for the final workshop of the year. They were excited to introduce a student-led forum where students could share their experiences and suggest actionable steps for promoting inclusivity in their school. "I think it's important that we involve as many people as possible," Jasmine said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "We need to showcase the diversity of voices in our school, especially those that haven't been heard." Kyle nodded in agreement. "We should also highlight how we can all take responsibility in our everyday lives. It's not just about talking. It's about taking action." "Definitely," Amy chimed in. "Maybe we can create a pledge for students to sign, committing to be allies and to stand up against prejudice in any form." As they brainstormed ideas, a sense of camaraderie filled the air. It felt invigorating to be part of something larger than themselves, a collective movement toward change that was gaining momentum. The day of the forum arrived, and the energy in the auditorium was electric. Students filed in, some looking nervous while others appeared eager to participate. Jasmine took a deep breath as she stood at the front, her heart racing. This was it, the culmination of their hard work and a chance to ignite a spark within their community. "Welcome, everyone," Jasmine called out, her voice ringing through the room. Today, we're here to share our stories, our experiences, and our hopes for a more inclusive Westfield High. Each voice matters, and together, we can make a difference. As the forum progressed, students began to share their stories. Some spoke of personal experiences with bias, while others highlighted the importance of allyship and solidarity. The room buzzed with empathy, understanding, and a shared commitment to fostering a more inclusive environment. One student, Maria, stood up and shared her journey as a first-generation immigrant. When I started high school, I felt like I was invisible. I struggled to fit in, and I often felt excluded because of my background. She said, her voice trembling but strong. But I've learned that sharing our stories can build bridges. We need to recognize our differences, but also our shared humanity. The audience erupted in applause, and Jasmine felt her heart swell with pride. This was what they had envisioned, a space for connection, understanding, and growth. As the forum continued, Jasmine spotted Miss Roberts at the back of the auditorium, her arms crossed tightly. The teacher's expression was unreadable, but Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that Miss Roberts would not remain passive for long. After the student stories, the group moved into smaller discussions where they could brainstorm practical actions for promoting inclusivity at Westfield High. Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose as students engaged in dialogue, building on each other's ideas and insights. I think we should have more events like this throughout the year, one student suggested. It shouldn't just be a one-time thing. We need to keep the conversation going. Yes, another chimed in. We could form an inclusivity club that meets regularly to discuss issues and plan activities. The energy in the room surged, and Jasmine felt a rush of optimism. This was more than just a workshop. It was the start of a movement that could carry into the next school year and beyond. As the forum drew to a close, Jasmine stood at the front once more, feeling empowered by the collective spirit in the room. "Thank you all for being so brave today," she said, her voice steady. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but together we can create a culture of empathy and respect at Westfield High." As students began to file out, Jasmine's heart soared. They had created something meaningful, a platform for dialogue and understanding that would resonate long after the school year ended. But her triumph was short-lived as she spotted Miss Roberts approaching, her expression stern. "Miss King," Miss Roberts began, her voice clipped. "While I appreciate your enthusiasm, I must remind you that this is a school, not a political platform. You need to focus on your studies and stop pushing this agenda." Jasmine felt a surge of frustration, but held her ground. "I understand your perspective, Miss Roberts, but this is about more than just politics. It's about fostering an environment where everyone feels valued and respected. Education should be about growth and understanding." "You're treading a fine line, young lady," Miss Roberts replied, her tone icy. "I suggest you reconsider the path you're taking." Jasmine met her gaze, determination etched on her face. "I won't back down, Miss Roberts. This is important, and I believe it matters. If we don't address these issues now, when will we?" Miss Roberts' expression hardened, and for a moment, Jasmine felt the weight of the confrontation hanging heavy in the air. But she refused to let fear dictate her actions. As the last students trickled out, Jasmine felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her. They had faced challenges, but they had also fostered a sense of community that transcended the divisions within their school. The following weeks were filled with continued planning and engagement. The group met regularly to solidify their plans for the Inclusivity Club and brainstorm events for the next school year. The excitement was contagious, and Jasmine felt a renewed sense of hope. As the school year wrapped up, they organized a final event, a community day that invited families and friends to celebrate the progress they had made together. They showcased student projects, shared stories, and provided resources on inclusivity and allyship. On the day of the event, the air buzzed with excitement as families arrived. Tables filled with colorful displays showcased student work, and Jasmine felt a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the school grounds, Jasmine took a moment to reflect on the journey she had undertaken. She remembered the fear she had felt when she first walked into Miss Roberts' class, the anxiety that had nearly paralyzed her. But now, she stood strong, surrounded by friends and allies who shared her vision for change. The event was a resounding success, filled with laughter, connection, and the promise of a brighter future. Families mingled, students shared stories, and Jasmine felt a deep sense of belonging. At the end of the evening, as they gathered for the closing remarks, Jasmine stood at the front, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you all for being here today and for supporting our mission to foster a more inclusive Westfield High," she began, her voice steady. "Together, we can create a culture of understanding and acceptance. This is just the beginning." As the crowd erupted in applause, Jasmine's heart raced with excitement. She had discovered her voice and found her place in the world, a world that she was determined to help reshape for the better. In the months that followed, Jasmine, Kyle, Amy, and Chad continued to lead the Inclusivity Club, their efforts gaining traction throughout the school community. They organized workshops, events, and discussions, ensuring that the momentum they had built would carry into the next school year. As summer approached, Jasmine felt a mix of anticipation and determination. She knew the road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but she was ready to face them head-on. She had found her voice, and now she would help others find theirs. Together, they would continue to advocate for change, challenging biases, and fostering a culture of empathy. Jasmine understood that every small step mattered, and with each action, they were sowing the seeds of change that would blossom in the hearts and minds of their peers. As she stood on the cusp of summer, Jasmine felt empowered, ready to embrace the future and the opportunities it would bring. The journey had only just begun, and she was determined to make it count.